Welcome to this Cambridge Marketing College webinar. It is a topic that is called Marketing Strategy Fundamentals for a Fast Changing World. And it doesn't require me to tell you how fast this world is changing. My name's Neil Wilkins. I'm one of the college tutors here at Cambridge Marketing College. Fast changing world, marketing strategy, and some fundamentals that have always been there and that we must remember because it's very easy to get swept along by the day to day, the emerging technologies, the AI, the tactical, and yet some of the things that are really, really inherent to successful marketing exist in the more traditional tools and approaches. So what we're going to do is we're going to see how we can apply some clear strategic thinking when tools, platforms, and conditions really keep shifting. And they do, literally by the day. If you are watching the media, you'll know that to be true. So we're going to revisit some of the enduring fundamentals of good, strong, solid marketing strategy. And we're going to apply them, hopefully, confidently in these what can be slightly risky and rapidly evolving environments and marketplaces that are, for lots of us, going to be quite uncertain in terms of how they're going to play out. So these are enduring things that you can rely on and trust in when you're actually making your marketing plans. Strategy really matters. You could say, well, it still matters, but I would say it really matters because what's happening is that with all of this change, and there is so much changing right now, you are going to need to really be able to rely on some of the core pillars of doing good business in your marketing. So strategy as a key word, and we'll go into defining that in just a moment, is all about providing some clear direction when the tactics, the markets, the technologies are shifting constantly. Strategy provides you with the direction. So it's like setting your sat nav for your business. And then you know what the eventual destination you're aiming for is, i.e., where you want to arrive. But actually, as these things change, like traffic conditions, etc., you might need to change a course or you might need to take a different route. So that's really what we're focusing on here is having this strategy, this strategic position. Because without strategy, activity will increase, but impact will decline because you don't really know where you're going to end up. So if you don't set your sat nav, in effect, in your business or in your marketing, you're going to be busy doing stuff, but where are you going to end up? You're not really going to be sure because you don't have that ultimate destination. So, Michael Porter would say strategy is about making choices and trade offs. It's about deliberately choosing to be different. And this, of course, does play out because most of us are getting swept along by the here and here today and all this lovely emerging, exciting, shiny stuff. And really, what we're saying here is yes, okay, but let's have a destination. That's really what we're after here. So I'd like you to reflect on this just for a moment. Where do you feel your marketing activity is currently busy, but not necessarily clearly directed? Are there things that you're doing or you see your colleagues doing that are kind of super active and it's all busy, there's great stuff happening, but it's not really strategic because it's not supporting a longer term view that maybe looks to the horizon and says, look, that's actually where we're aiming for. That is our destination over there. We're busy doing stuff, but is it really contributing? So, what is it that you or your colleagues are doing that makes you busy right now, but isn't really necessarily showing proof or evidence that it's actually directed into a long-term position? So, when we say marketing strategy, what are we actually talking about and what are we not talking about? So, a marketing strategy is not a content plan, it's not a list of tools, it's not a channel mix or anything like that. You often hear people saying, oh, my strategies are. Well, that's tactics. Okay, tactics are the short term thing, the stuff you're going to do this year. Your strategy is probably 3 to 5 years out where you're aiming for. It's a more directional thing. So you don't say, oh, my strategies, those are my tactics. And you often hear people kind of misusing those two words. So if it's not those things, what actually is marketing strategy? Well, I would define it as a set of deliberate choices about who to serve, how to compete, and where to focus. And Michael Porter, again, we'll use him because he's one of the gurus of traditional marketing, says the essence of strategy is deciding what not to do. So that's interesting, isn't it? When you stop and think about that, because why are we all busy? Why are we all chasing stuff? It's because we're probably saying yes to too many things. So if the essence of good strategy, this directional thing in the future, is deciding what not to do, introduces this word priority. So, reflective question for you. What marketing activities might you need to stop or deprioritize? So, push them further down the order of priority on your list of things to do because they're not strategic. They're not helping a long term goal or gain. That's a key question here, isn't it? If you stop and think about this stuff, very easy to get swept along by getting busy and doing loads of things. But if we're not pointing these things and prioritizing these things into what's most important, and in fact, what is actually business critical or marketing essential, then we're actually missing the point here of the value of strategy. So, this essence of strategy is deciding what not to do. And of course, this becomes a filter. So, you can start to say, okay, there's an opportunity there. Look, okay, does that support my strategy? Yes, no. If it's a yes, okay, we'll consider it in our list. If it's no, but it's exciting, don't do it. Park it. It might come back and prove itself and its worth in the future, but right here, right now, the answer is no. So, what creates strategic pressure? Well, we're going to see a lot of things from platform algorithms changing. That's going to put pressure on you, isn't it? You're chasing the latest algorithm. If you use things like Instagram or LinkedIn, you'll kind of know this to be true. Whenever you look at it, something's changed, something's moved. So there's going to be something else going on. Consumer behavior shifts. Of course, we are all human. We're all moving and adapting ourselves. So that's going to be a big one as well. And currently, economic and social conditions fluctuating. So some of these macro things can create a lot of strategic pressure, but strategy acts as a stabilizer when this stuff is fluctuating and going up and down. There are a lot of theories here that come into apply here because we know this stuff is true. We know that there's so much change happening. And, if you watch the marketing press or you read the media or you watch your social media timeline, you'll know that things are constantly evolving and moving. And those are strategic pressures. They will put pressure on that guiding principle that you have, that strategy that takes you into the future. It'll be squeezed and pressed and pulled in different directions as these changes take place. But it is a stabilizer as all those things happen because it's bigger and more important. So just think for a moment then, what external change is currently putting the most pressure on your market decisions and your marketing activities? Something big picture stuff. Is it economic? Is it your customers changing or your customers' behaviors changing? Is it, new competitive pressures coming in? What is it that's actually happening that's putting the most pressure on your marketing decisions? Often I hear, oh, time. We don't have enough time to do all the things that we've committed. Or it could be budget. Things are tight. Sales are a little bit pressured or a bit down. So budget's been cut and all those kinds of things. These will put pressure on your strategy. But it doesn't mean your strategy then has to change, but we need to adapt it. So just to come back to this sort of confusion, if you like, between some of these terms. So strategy, this is your long-term direction and positioning, that really critical kind of longer-term view to the horizon. Tactics, these are the individual actions and tools that sit behind planning, which is actually how you execute your strategy. So you've got your strategy, which is kind of out there. You've got your planning, which shows you maybe some of those steps that you're taking towards where you're trying to go. And then your tactics, the actions you're going to take today, and the tools and the channels of choice. Lovely quote here that goes back many, many centuries from Sun Tzu, which was strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. But tactics without strategy is the noise you hear before defeat. Interesting. So you do need both, really, is what we're saying here. But one or other doesn't work in isolation. So the reflected question for you on this bit then is which level do you personally spend your time most of all working at? And I would say it's probably tactical, isn't it? Isn't it just the doing? You end up spending, if you're anything like me, a lot of time doing the doing of our role. But actually thinking about the planning and how we could maybe prioritize some of the efficiencies and doing things better, maybe that could be a good little balance that we might want to tune. And strategy. constantly checking back into our long-term direction and positioning. Are all the things we're doing day to day supporting our strategy? Maybe balance the time, if you like, sort of priority between those three things: strategy, planning, and tactics. And don't spend all of your time just doing one or other. I mean, if you're just spending time doing strategy and you don't do anything, you're not actually doing anything to support it, well, there you go. That's going to take forever, isn't it? And if you're doing loads of stuff, but you don't have any strategy, well, you're going to get overtaken or beaten by the competition. So it is a balance. That's really what we're saying and what we're trying to strike here. So the core strategic foundations, let's have a look at these and go into some of this in a little bit more detail then. So, and again, remembering that we're in these fast moving environments. So there's always this pressure on what I'm about to talk about, but it is so important to have it here, have it really solid and sorted. You can adapt it, you can flex it, but it needs to be there and it needs to be front of mind in all of your decision making. So, strategy begins with intent. You need an intention. You need to know that there's a purpose about what you're doing. So this kind of strategy then becomes directional, but also meaningful. There needs to be a value both to you as an organization, probably you as a person, but also to your customers too. So all stakeholders. And the purpose that I'm talking about there clarifies what value you aim to create. In other words, there's 101 different ways of delivering that product, but actually our purpose clarifies how we do it because we're a certain style, or we do this in a more sustainable way, or we're a more responsible kind of business. So therefore, these rules apply. So doing it thoughtfully, or as I would always call mindfully, this is mindful marketing. It's a really important thing. And again, a question that we can always ask and should continually ask of ourselves is, what problem does our marketing exist to solve for our customers? So ask yourself then, what problem does your marketing exist to solve for your customers? Because if it is just about, I want to get them to buy this product or this service or click on this link to join this event, the big question is why? Always asking the why. That Simon Sinek question is challenge your why. It's so, so important to do this because that again is directional. That again is going to take you in the right kind of strategic kind of perspective on all the things that you do. And of course, all of this needs to understand a market context. I mean, I've seen a lot of organizations over the years kind of do what you might call ivory tower. You might have heard this phrase, ivory tower planning, where you kind of sit in a darkened room and you're planning, without opening the windows, looking outside, and you get this amazing plan and you take it out into the big wide world and nobody cares. The tumbleweed rolls by. The products and services are irrelevant because they weren't researched. Strategy has to be done in a way that reflects market realities. So you need to be doing the research first. And of course, we've got AI to do deep research or bring AI into our planning meetings so it becomes relevant, the stuff that we're doing and talking about. So we need to consider customers, competitors, any substitutes for what we're thinking about, any constraints on resources, budget, or time. I mean, a pestle analysis, which is a typical framework that you'd bring in at this stage of strategy and planning, is a really, really useful one. So I like to really sort of think about within pestle, political, economic, social, technological, legal, or environmental, the L and the E at the end of pestle there. Which one currently most affects your market right now? So if you were going into a strategic planning meeting right now, straight after listening to this, what external factor would be the big one for you? And you don't have to necessarily get it right. And it might be that actually there's three or four, but just choose one right now and just think about that one. Is how and why is that impacting on us? Because that needs to be factored in when you're starting to understand the market context. Because again, there's another filter for decision making. If it is about technology, what is it that we need to either learn or upskill or provide as a technological solution to the customers? Are there things we need to do differently to our processes, for example? It gets the conversation started. Doesn't necessarily at this stage give you answers of what you're going to do, but strategically it gets everybody aligned into the right conversation. That's key. Knowing your customers strategically as well. A lot of us do this, and I know I find myself doing this a lot, is we do a lot of segmentation. We'll build customer personas. We'll do some, customer journeys, we'll plot all these things out, and we'll almost kind of forget that they're not segments on a spreadsheet, but actually they have motivations. They have a context. They have a real world that they're living in. They're doing certain behaviors, and those behaviors might be changing and moving and shifting over time. And of course, our job is to be there to solve their problems with them, to deliver against the needs or the challenges they have, maybe to save their time. I often find that is one of the key things that your customer wants from you is just save me a bit of time. I'm feeling so busy as one of your customers. Please just save me some time with whatever it is you provide. And that often is one of the big things that people miss when they're doing marketing is it is one of the, if not the most human priority, if you like. It's not just a commodity thing. It's so intrinsic to everything that we do is time. So think about what your customer and what job your customer is really hiring your product or service to do. And I would say factor in the question is it time saving? Is it better use of time? Is it getting more value from time? Because I often find, irrespective of the market or whether it's B2B or B2C, often the answer is time. And you might be able to identify one or two other things as well in that question. What job is your customer really hiring your product or service to do? And it might not be something that you're communicating. And then, of course, strategically, that's knowing your customer because that's going to guide everything else when it comes to tactics and tools and messaging and social media and digital marketing and all of that. That's going to guide what you say and how you say it. Competitive positioning as well is another core strategic foundation. Strategy is relative, it isn't absolute. It's relative to what's going on in the marketplaces you serve. And you're always competing for the attention, the time, and the trust of those who are looking for a product or service like yours. Porter's generic strategies is a good one, actually, if you want a framework to look into this. And we're all working in a competitive environment. You might think, well, actually, there's nobody really who competes with us because we're super good or we're incredibly professional. But of course, there are other organizations solving your customers' needs in direct or indirect ways that might be sort of almost hidden in plain sight. If you don't know who you're trying to beat, you probably won't. We don't know actually who first said that. If you do, let me know. It's just a great quote. If you don't know actually who your competition is, and it's direct or indirect in terms of solving that customer need, you need to know. It doesn't matter whether you're a content creator, senior marketing strategist, chief marketing officer, you need to know who you're trying to beat. And you need to have them, not necessarily so you obsess about them and they're front of mind and they, skew every decision you make, but just knowing who the competition is and knowing what they're up to will help you to make an offer that's meaningly different from the next best alternative. And right now, the question you could reflect on is what makes your offer meaningly different from the next best alternative? And does that relate to the customer context we just talked about? Are you offering that in the way that that macro situation you've identified before, that pestle analysis, those big challenges coming from the marketplace? Do all these things line up? This is strategy. This is strategic thinking. Super important. And in fast moving environments, we've got to be fleet of foot. Focus will beat coverage in all ways in this regard. So trying to be everywhere and trying to do loads and loads of things as, we've got this strategy and we've got all these channels and these tools and we're trying to put these messages out, we're getting people to events and we're going out and we're selling and this, that, and the other. It can become very wired and very frenetic. And it can spread you very thinly. And if you try and be everywhere, you will be diluting everything. You'll be diluting your sales, you'll be diluting the attention you get. And so strategic focus creates what we call coherence. It just allows things to join up naturally. It enables things to just settle into place, do their job. Channels will do their job, content will do its job. And so if you find yourself, and I would ask you to think about, where are you spreading your effort too thinly? And that could be, well, we've just got too many products that we're trying to push out. Or it could be, well, the after sales service is just so broad. We're just trying to serve everybody in the same kind of way. We don't have the resources. Or it could be, we're trying to go after too many different types of customer. then the 80-20 rule applies. Pareto principle is one I'd really encourage you to do because 80% of the value is coming from 20% of the stuff you do. Just stop and think about that for a moment. Doesn't matter what market you're in, what business you work in, what products or services you've got, 80% of the value is coming from 20% of your stuff. 80% of the product sales are coming from 20% of your product lines. 20% of your customers give you 80% of your revenue. And if you don't believe me, go look at your numbers. And I don't even know who's listening to this, me saying it, but I do know Pareto principle just works. 80-20 rule. And so you need to know where that 20% is and what it's about, because that's giving you 80% of the stuff. So look at your numbers, look at your data, and figure out from that, okay, where's my 20%? Oh, okay, so those are the things I need to focus on because that's going to beat spreading yourself too thinly every time. Also, we need to be working in a, well, basically strategy as a hypothesis. And, because in these fast moving and by definition, uncertain or sort of maybe slightly risky environments, strategy is a working hypothesis. In other words, it's a set of assumptions, predictions, forecasts, and rules that hope we get to our destination. And it is a little bit of hope. So, what you need to do is you need to make sure you're constantly testing it, refining it, watching it, revisiting it, maybe tuning it and changing it. And that's fine. I'm not suggesting here just because I said you set your sat nav and there's the destination, you've got to stoically stick to it and never deviate. That's not what we're saying. Because what we're saying is it's an available option now to be kind of fine tuning it. It's not like tactics, which move super quickly. This is something that might take a little bit more time, a bit more energy, a little bit more focus, but it's really important to say this is quality working. This is quality kind of reflection and planning. This is what we're talking about here. So currently then, if you think about your own, what assumption underpins your current strategy that might no longer hold? In other words, if you think about where we're trying to go as a business, as a group, as a marketing team, is there something in what we hold as an assumption? And it could be a certain customer assumption, or it could be a certain market assumption, or it could be assuming that certain products still provide the value that you thought they did when you launched them. Think of one assumption that underpins your current strategy that you might want to go and revisit because we're in a fast moving environment, it might have gone out of date. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be an easy question to answer, but it's so important. We're fast moving environments here, of course. And, just by definition, we've got to keep our finger on the pulse. So, what assumption underpins your current strategy that might no longer hold? Really important. And as we're doing this, I think what we're seeing emerge here, and this is kind of a bit of a theme really with all of this thinking, is balancing this kind of long-term direction with short-term adaptation. So the strategies, we said a number of times, will set the direction, but the tactics adapts to the conditions. Okay, so plans themselves are pretty useless, but planning is indispensable. That was Dwight D. Eisenhower who said that. And just think about that for a minute. Plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. So a plan, which is a noun, it's a thing, is very different to planning, which is a verb, an action, a thing that you're doing, a behavior. And that's what we're trying to talk about here. We're talking about constantly planning, but our plans are almost the record of that constant planning, if you see what I mean. So the plans are the thing, but those have got to adapt. But the planning is the activity, the mindset, the acceptance that it is going to change. We might want to keep it relatively consistent, but it's going to move over time. So, how often do you review strategy versus reacting tactically? Think about that for a minute. Is this a once a year activity? Oh, it's planning season or it's strategy time. So, we've got to build our marketing strategy again or build our plans for this year versus actually just constantly reacting to what's going on in the market. I've got a couple of clients right now who are very, very responsive to the market, and their strategy is so loose and I was going to call it woolly, and it kind of is woolly. It's more than flexible because it gets skewed so heavily by the tactical decisions that they're needing to make because that's where their focus is. They're tactics led. The strategy kind of tries to play catch up. That is the wrong way round to have things. The tactics should be supporting the strategy, but not the strategy not so set in its ways that it's just a thing that we all, support and pay homage to. It needs to know that it has to adapt to. So think of that. Plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. So think of strategy as an activity, not necessarily a document that just sits there gathering dust. It's an important differentiation there. And strategic consistency, though, across change is important because channels and formats, the way we do stuff is going to change, but the positioning and the value should remain relatively consistent. So, this is why we have brand guidelines. This is why we have a strategy that will kind of guide us, and everybody should be aware and knowing it. These are really important things. Because, of course, if you think about this, here's a question for you. What would your core message still make sense if your main channel disappeared tomorrow? I always worry about content creators and influencers and the word that they've created because a lot of them will invest as I'm a YouTuber or I'm an Instagram influencer. But what happens if YouTube or Instagram change the rules or disappear tomorrow? You cannot assume these third-party platforms and channels will be here tomorrow. No brand that's ever existed has ever not gone through a life cycle of growth, maturity, and then decline. Instagram will not be here forever. YouTube will not be here forever. I can promise you that. It's, the history of time has shown that to be true, although we assume that these channels are always going to be here. So your strategy, which is your positioning and value, that is the thing that you can trade with. That's the most important bit. The choice of channels and the formats and the way that you communicate through, those things are going to change. And acceptance of that is key. Again, as things move really, really fast, you've got to make sure that you're owning the right stuff and that you allow flexibility with the other stuff. So the question, would your core messages still make sense if your main channel disappeared tomorrow? I'm not trying to over alert you here and kind of frighten you, but it's an important consideration because if your main channel disappeared, just wasn't here, tomorrow, would you still be able to trade? Would you still be able to do business at this same kind of level? The answer has to be yes, or you don't have a sustainable business. So getting the right strategic elements or ingredients, if you like, are really, really key. And then once you know these kinds of things, you're able then to sort of maybe use a framework or two to actually put some of this stuff into an order. I've been talking about making decisions and strategizing so that you can actually create some priorities. Well, things like SOSTAC, for example, Paul Smith's amazing and it's very, very simple in essence framework. You can revisit this in a volatile or fast changing market and see if it works. So the situation could be the first S could be what is changing, and we know it's going to be changing very quickly. Objectives, what must remain true? So, what objectives do I need to set that despite this situation changing fast, I need them to stay consistent because we've got to run a business here, guys. Strategy. How am I then going to compete in this volatile market, fast changing? Well, there's your strategy. How are we going to compete? So we've got this kind of longer term view. The tactics in a fast moving or fast changing environment that's very volatile, we've got to have flexible execution. So we've got to be able to jump or dance between different channels or different platforms and stuff as we need to. So not just set range of things that we've always done it through these channels and we assume they'll be here tomorrow as relevant as they ever were. No, this is about flexible execution. What have we got to do? What have we got to change? In action plan, operational clarity, everybody buying into doing less is more, but super, super laser focused attention on the things that are meaningful. That's key. So that operational clarity in a volatile, fast changing market is key. And of course, the control, it's never been more true in a fast changing world, is that we've got to do continuous measurement. We've got to know how and where things are moving and changing so that we can actually adapt. And then we can come back in and start making this SOSTAC framework into a loop. So we consistently go round and round and round. So, as we're kind of questioning what we're doing here, my question for you to reflect on is which SOSTAC stage, situation, objectives, strategy, tactics, action, or control, is currently weakest in your work? Is there one here that you could jump into and from a strategic fundamental perspective say, okay, I'm going to start with that one? I mean, ideally, you're going to look at all six, but you've got to start somewhere. So, which one of those six would you say, okay, if I had to really kind of dive deeply in and see whether we can make some improvements here, this is the one I'd focus on because that at least gets you started on this journey. And of course, the other sort of things that come into play here, the other frameworks that still work in this fast changing world, are things like the value proposition canvas. If you don't know this one, you can do some little bit of research and find this one. Is this is really important, and there are many models. Alex Hormozi's got a very popular one that's trending right now. His value equation, which again, if you haven't seen, search out Alex Hormozi. Incredible sort of strategist in very much fast changing and sort of emerging marketplaces. And this is all about understanding the customer jobs, pains and gains, understands the product benefits aligned to real value, and actually identifies any kind of friction points and the time that the customer has to spend, hopefully not much time, to get the value that you're providing. There are equations and canvases to create that value strategically. This isn't about, okay, then do I then do the next Instagram post? This is at a much higher level, thinking more strategically. And then it may or may not be Instagram is the answer in terms of getting the message through. But that then comes out and becomes much clearer once you've done this kind of a level of initial thinking. That's an important thing to do. And we're also going to be thinking about how our customer lifetime value, our CLV model, starts to play out as well. Because really, if you think about this, what we're doing ultimately is optimizing and prioritizing long-term value, not just short-term wins. Now, many of us live in environments where the sales pressure to do this month's numbers is always going to take precedence. But what I'm not saying is it has to be one or other. I think there's a balance. Maybe it's 80-20. Maybe if you're at 100% right now, it's all about today. Maybe we could skew it a little bit to 80-20. So it's 80% about today and maybe 20% strategic. If you're already doing a good amount of strategic work and the actual lifetime value focus that you have is there already in play, and it isn't just about selling your products and services today, then maybe you can skew that number even better, even higher. I mean, ultimately, really, the purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer. It's Peter Drucker, again, another big name in marketing strategy. The purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer. So you've got to do both, really. Any salesperson who says, no, it's all about today is missing the point that if you're doing good marketing, you're protecting them and keeping the value in the long term as well. Far easier for those of us in the know who know this thing, far easier to sell to an existing customer than to go and find a new one. Far easier, but also far more profitable as well. So this balance between long term and short term comes into this customer lifetime value question as well, which is how does your strategy encourage customers to stay, not just convert today? Because this is the value we're trying to create with strategy. And as the world goes past us at a huge pace and real fast rate, what we've got to make sure is that we're doing the right stuff for the long term as well as for the short term. And what we can do is we can actually then start to really look deeply into, well, how are we doing when we start to talk this? Because if we're just talking about it but not actually delivering it, then it's not a plan or it's not a strategy that's of really any value to us. So we need to then be making informed strategic choices based on data and insights. So get the evidence to show what you're doing today. This is why I keep asking you these questions, because if you can identify and uncover some of the areas where you can get some quick wins, there's a great opportunity here, a great opportunity for providing evidence to the organization to help them understand where the gaps, where the shortfalls, and where the improvements can be actually made. And insights matter often more than volume. Because it's if you know the stuff, if you know where the opportunities are, what you're doing is you're opening up opportunities for tomorrow. You're not just saying, oh, I'm reporting on what happened behind us. Actually, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm reporting on what happened behind us so we can understand where better to go in the future. So that sat nav analogy I gave you earlier means that we can then adapt the channel choices, the style of messaging under this big value proposition that we've got. So we can start to fine tune where we're going and the direction that we're taking to get us to our strategy. So, what strategic decision would benefit for you right now most from better insight? Think about that. So, if I'm talking to you about we've got to get this longer term view, this kind of longer term value to the customer, this more sort of bigger brand rather than just sales approach to marketing and communications and the way we position our products, what strategic decision would benefit you now, here, right now, from better insight? So, what is it kind of that you're missing that you don't know? And these will be things that are probably, as I said earlier, hiding in plain sight. You just haven't actually devoted the time and the energy to look at them or actually see what is inside those. And of course, if you're thinking, yeah, Neil, but that's all very well, but I'm super busy. I've got all this stuff I need to do. I haven't got time to do this. Well, AI as a strategic support, of course, AI can support sensing, forecasting, research, optimization, and strategy then can define where AI is used. AI is going to amplify the intent that you have. It doesn't replace it. That was an MIT Sloan Management Review quote. It's going to accelerate and scale up anything you're thinking about, anything you're doing. It doesn't actually replace it. It just lets you do more of the good stuff if you can find what the good stuff is. So, reflective question, where could AI help you see patterns you currently miss? And if that is in doing the base research, actually getting some insights fed into our business or into our marketing, then there's a great starting point. There's the place to start. And that's really important to begin to think about how AI can support you. And what we're doing as we're doing this, again, this strategy enabled by data and AI is avoiding tool-led strategy. Tools should follow the strategic need. Strategy should never be retrofitted in. And again, it's an interesting one, isn't it, really? And I guess this whole, and I often see this one with the whole Copilot versus ChatGPT question, is, which tool currently dictates how you work more than it should? And for a lot of us, it probably, if we're tied into a Microsoft environment, and I'm not disrespecting Microsoft or Teams or anything like that in any way, but I'm just asking the question, are we being held back by the tools that we're being told we need to use than actually saying, no, this is the thing I need to solve as a challenge. Which tool will support me or serve me better to use to be able to do that? That's a far better way round to do this stuff than actually in reverse, which is being driven by the tools. And many organizations fall into that trap. So think if you're missing a trick, and maybe then you could actually get some evidence and data to support a pitch or a proposal into your organization that says, okay, I get why things are as they are, but if we were to take this approach, we could actually achieve this, or this is what we'd find, which would enable that. So, again, another different way of strategically enabling data and AI to support you rather than it just being there in the background. And what we're doing is we start then to talk to others in the organization, start to kind of get everybody else involved. Is that strategy and practice is all about using strategy as a shared language so that you all understand where that sat nav is set towards. And strategy has to be understood across teams. If you have a marketing strategy rather than a larger strategy, only marketers are going to understand that bit. If you've got a finance strategy that customer support and sales and marketing don't understand, then that's just a finance strategy. Now, I'm not saying you don't have localized, single discipline strategies, but those have got to support a larger reason for being. And this clarity is going to enable alignment and autonomy because then you can get on and do the stuff you do to support this higher picture within the organization. And Brene Brown, the guru of vulnerability, but is also the guru of clarity as well. She says that clarity is kindness, is being kind within the organization to help everybody to understand the why we do what we do and how we can support each other and how we can in a clarified way talk to each other because we're using strategy as a shared language. We all know we're pulling in the same direction is really what I'm saying here. So, could a colleague explain your strategy accurately in one sentence? If you were to ask them, would they know what marketing strategy was? Have you communicated it in such a way that anybody could play it back to you and you'd say, yep, got it? Because that's your job. Your job is to actually be able to share that so people can then play it back to you. That is the best way of clarifying. Don't make assumptions. Actually, get on to being into a position where you're hearing back the things that you're putting out. Because if you are, you're in a really strong position there. And what happens is then that governance and strategic discipline just kind of sort of falls out of that because strategy does require boundaries and prioritize activities because not every opportunity should be pursued. It works as a beautiful filter for everybody, not just in marketing, but beyond. It enables you then to say yes and no. And it helps you to then be able to share with others the reasoning behind saying yes and no, and people will get it the first time. So, what kind of decision rule could help you say no more confidently? What kind of thing within your strategy would it enable you to say, look, we can do this tactic, we can do this campaign, we could go to that exhibition and do that event. But the reason I'm recommending no is because. And it's not a tactical, budgetary, or time reason, it's a more strategic reason. Those are the things that will put marketing on the top table. Those are the things that will put marketing on the map of, wow, they really know their stuff. And that person, wow, that was a really good decision to make because I now understand, as the recipient of that decision, I understand why you did it that way. That's the kind of reaction we want from people. And that's when you know that strategy is actually working. So how can we actually start pulling this together? These are a lot of the kind of the building blocks, if you like, but we need to kind of structure them. So a simple strategy canvas that's going to enable you to provide that clarity, to be able to talk across the organization with this clarity would be target customer, their core problem, the value proposition that you're going to keep to them, the competitive difference, and then slightly more tactically, the key channels and any success measures that you want to put in there. And so, which of these elements for you is currently the least clear? Because this could be a great way of getting a fast track into your strategic goals, I guess, or into your strategy or your strategic planning going forward. Target customer, their core problem, your value proposition against that core problem, the competitive difference that makes your value proposition different, the key channels, because that's where your customers are going to hear from you and engage with you, and then the success measures so that you can then confidently know you're making progress. Those six elements are absolutely key. So, which one is least clear for you right now? Start there. And there are some core questions you can ask yourself within this strategy canvas in the target customer. Who are we deliberately choosing to focus on right now? The word deliberately is key there. And it isn't just because we always have. No, no, no. This is who are we deliberately choosing to focus on right now. That's strategic. The core customer problem. The question is, what real problem or job is this customer trying to solve? And it isn't your product's features and benefits. It's what problem are they trying to solve? That's a core customer problem from a strategic perspective. The value proposition. What outcome do we help them achieve in simple customer centered language? That's the question you're answering. The differentiation. Why should they choose us over the next best alternative? Because you're not operating in isolation. There are other ways they can solve that core customer problem. And even if your value proposition is really strong, you need to make sure that you know how you're differentiating and that they understand it too. And the priority channels one is where will we primarily show up to reach and engage with them? And where will we not? So choosing where you're not going to go is as important as where you are going to go. Because remember, strategy is all about focus. And then the success measure question. How will we know this strategy is working? And continuous improvement in brackets there, remember from earlier, using outcome-based metrics. Think about what those might be for your particular situation. That's key. And then what we can do is we can then make sure by consistently coming back and revisiting those questions that we are actually reviewing constantly, our strategy with constant reinvention from the answers that we see. So it should be stable, but not static. Change is inevitable, but we've got to make sure we adapt to that change. So what we're seeing here is that our tactics are going to change a lot, but that our strategy is going to be pretty solid, but it's flexible enough to kind of move and morph if it needs to. So, big question is, when was the last time you consciously reviewed in a really mindful way your strategy? And if the answer is, well, we've never really done it like this, Neil, then there's some questions in that Canvas framework that you could answer to get you started. And if it is, well, we only do it once a year, I'm going to ask you the question is that enough? Because what we're seeing here is that in a fast moving environment, it's important to be constantly revisiting it. And if we don't, we could fall into some of the common strategic traps. It's confusing activity with progress. Just because you're busy doesn't mean it's appropriate. It's overreacting to trends. That doesn't mean you don't monitor the trends and see which are most important to prioritize reacting to, but overreacting to them just because they're big and noisy is not strategic. And chasing competitors instead of customers, many organizations fall into that one because they feel like they're going to miss out. FOMO in strategy is a absolute deal breaker. And of course, you can understand that in the concept or the theory of strategic drift. Go and have a little look in the research on that, because you've got to watch out for this stuff. It's not something to obsess about, but just be aware these are traps you could fall into. So maybe just have these as little checkpoints. Just make sure that you're not kind of falling into these. And which one currently do you feel that you might, as an organization or as a team, have the most risk of falling into? That's quite an important one. So maybe think about that as you're going through this. And some final thoughts, really, because I haven't really given you answers, I guess, here, because we're all so different. The markets, the environments, the organizations, the culture, the kind of situations that we find ourselves in fast-moving, fast-changing world can be very, very personal to us. But what I'm really kind of encouraging you to do is to think about marketing strategy as not something that's predicting the future, but about making clear choices that remain valid as that future unfolds. Okay, that's the key kind of difference here, because the strategy, remember, strategy here is a verb. It's not a noun. It's a thing that we're going to be doing, not that we've produced. The best one is the one that you can actually stick to. So the more you can make these strategic choices, little steps that take you forward in a strategic way to build your brand, to give you that confidence in the future, as well as doing the day to day today, as long as you can do those things, then you're on a good track. This is not a perfect science by any way, it just isn't. But what you get an opportunity to do here is to build the evidence as things are going crazy around you, that you're actually on course and that you're not going to be swayed by the irrelevant stuff or the noisiest stuff. You're doing the right thing. You're doing the right priorities. You're laser focused, but with a bit of adaptability. And so I would ask you now, at the end of all of this, is what is the single strategic choice that you are going to clarify or commit to after this session? Because the good strategists are always very consciously thinking, what is my next move? What is like playing chess? What is my next move that's going to take me in the right direction? What is the next choice I have to make? What is the next thing I need to prioritize? Because in that way, then what you're doing is you're building a marketing strategy that will adapt, exist, and be sustainable in whatever pace of fast changing world you encounter in the future.